This week felt like a shift, not just in pop culture, but in how the law is starting to deal with it. You have reality TV casting people because they're messy and then dropping them when the audience gets uncomfortable. You have social media companies being told by a jury that their product design might actually be the problem. And you have platforms changing how much access they have to your messages and your data. All of these stories are different on the surface, but they're all asking the same question. At what point does entertainment turn into liability? Welcome back to Exhibit A List, where pop culture gets cross examined. I'm your host, Jasmine Wegg. I'm a lawyer and I break down the contracts, power dynamics, and the legal realities behind the stories everyone is talking about. Quick reminder, find me on Instagram, Jasmine Wegg ESQ, and the podcast Exhibit A List Pod. Also on TikTok, Jazz the Lawyer. Please follow, rate, and review this podcast. Share it with a friend who needs a lawyer bestie. We all have one or two. Okay, this week, we're not doing one deep dive. We're just diving on through because summer's coming. Every story this week hit on the same theme where entertainment stops being fun and starts creating real legal exposure. And I picked these intentionally. One of them I was actually interviewed about this week. One of them people are completely misunderstanding, and one of them just turned internet chaos into a lawsuit. And another one I've been waiting for. All right, let's start with this story because I was asked this week to be quoted in a Yahoo article, and it was about why networks cast messy people and then act shocked when things go left. I love this topic because if you watch reality TV, you already know the answer. They need chaos. No one is casting emotionally stable, conflict avoided, well adjusted people and expecting high ratings on reality TV. They are casting people with histories, drama, unpredictability, bad decision making, and that is the product. But then there's this very specific moment that happens where the audience stops being entertained. It reminds me of that gladiator line. Are you not entertained? No, the audience starts feeling uncomfortable. And once that happens, everything changes. The network pulls back, the tone shifts. The same behavior that was marketable becomes a problem. And what I said in the article, and I'll say it more directly here, is this: it's not about morality, or not only about morality. It's about audience tolerance. That's the real line. And the network always knew who they casted. They always know. We've seen this across franchises. Real Housewives, behavior gets rewarded until it crosses a line. Vanderpump, same thing. Bachelor, same thing. Love is Blind, same thing. Married at First Sight, we keep seeing it and seeing it. They push right up to the edge of what the audience will accept. And then the second the audience reacts negatively, they reposition themselves like this was unexpected. But it wasn't. It just stopped working. And that's the part I find most interesting because it's not ethics, it's risk management. And that's a legal term. See, the thing in Taylor Frankie Paul's situation is that it went from something people knew cognitively, like people were aware of her accident report, her police report of the incident that occurred, but people hadn't seen that raw footage with their own eyes. When you actually see violence, it's a whole different story. It's why when there are photos and video footage in a criminal or even a civil accident case, when you're able to show that to the court and to the judge, it's going to have a much stronger impact because those photos and videos are evoking raw emotions, something that just doesn't happen when something is written and can easily be filed in the back of someone's head and detached from. Once that raw emotional footage was released, I think that the networks who were already in mostly aware of what had happened, if not fully aware, because they are a very sophisticated team that does extensive research and background checks on whoever they cast. But I think once that footage was in front of them, they felt that there was a line that the audience would suddenly draw because it was no longer fun to watch. It was so uncomfortable because it got so ugly that the network did not want to look bad. And this is the same network that was making quite a bit of money off of all of the messy and chaotic and also problematic behavior that was happening over the past few years on Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. And it was all fun and games because it was bringing in profit and the viewers were still amused. But when it came to the point where this was starting to taint the Bachelor Bachelorette franchise reputation, where it was starting to look like they were just casting someone who was a perpetrator of potentially abusive behavior and could potentially be endangering the people around him, then they didn't want to continue to air the show that they already recorded. They already assumed all that risk when they recorded it. But they didn't want to air it because they would no longer be able to position themselves as the good guys. So I really think that the line is drawn not by morality, it's by what will keep money in pockets. And it was a business decision. Okay, switching gears because I've got a lot of messages about this, and I keep seeing posts saying that Meta is now releasing all your DMs and nothing's private anymore. But let's talk about what's actually happening. Meta is planning to end the end-to-end encryption on Instagram messaging. End-to-end encryption means that only you and the person you're messaging can read those messages, not the platform. However, on May 8th, this comes to an end. When that changes, Meta will have access to your messages. However, it does not necessarily mean that it is feeding it to Meta AI, which I'm seeing a lot on the internet being accused. Now, I don't know if that's not something that can occur, but that's not what that necessarily means. But it does mean something important. It means that the platform is having more access than it did before. And you'll see if in the future, based on your DMs, you're suddenly getting ads that are way more targeted than ever before. And you're questioning, how in the world is Instagram know exactly what I've been thinking about getting? This is how. There was a famous story a while ago where a girl was 16 and she got this package, I think from one of the big Walmart, Target type of places, and it was like a new mom package. And her father freaked out and he was like, "Why would they think you're pregnant?" And it turned out she was. And the store basically knew based on her online behavior, probably internet searches or whatever data they had on her, that she was pregnant before she had even announced it to her family. And that's how crazy the data that they collect on us is. And now this is one more deeper level. So your Instagram messages that you're exchanging between other people, the things you laugh at, the things that you find amusing or whatever you're saying, and even more so if you're engaging as a business, so you're doing more wider volume Instagram messaging, these DMs now will legally be accessible to the platform. And once a company has access to data, the question becomes, what are they allowed to do with it? What did users agree to? Because we're all signing these agreements when we download an app, we scroll all the way to the bottom and click accept, because if you decline, you just don't get the app. There's no negotiating those contracts. And we don't even realize what we are accepting or agreeing to. This is where people lose the plot because technically most of this comes down to terms of service and no one reads that. But the takeaway here is that Instagram is going to have more access, more data, and potentially more integration with their AI systems. And we're going to see if that plays out in the law and if lawsuits arise from it. I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, this next story I love because it sounds ridiculous at first. And then you're like, wait, hold on. What's going on? Okay, so I actually saw this a week or two ago. I saw this comedian, Learn More Jonasi. He was on someone's podcast and somehow he ended up singing the iconic opening chant to Lion King. He was singing that tune. Not singing I totally butchered it. I hope they don't sue me next. But then he goes, the meaning is, look, there's a lion. Oh my God. And everyone went crazy. He said it like in that voice and tune. And everyone was like, oh my God, that's what it meant. We thought it was like so deep and intense and like tribal and whatever. And this whole thing blew up because Lebo M is a Grammy award winning composer and he actually performed the chant in The Lion King. So he goes and files a $27 million federal lawsuit. Guess what he's claiming? Y'all know it's defamation because that's everybody's famous allegation. So he is saying that it was damaging to his reputation, to his relationship with Disney, and to his royalties, what he said. And he said that it does not mean, look, there's a lion, oh my God. It is a cultural announcement of royalty. He actually used a term that he referred to what was done here as theft by mockery. But the actual literal translation of what was said does reference something along the lines of there being a lion. So, what's interesting here is that the composer is saying it doesn't matter what it literally says, it matters what culturally, what the meaning of the song or the chant is. Now, Learnmore Jonasi, the comedian, he was actually served with the complaint while he was on stage mid set. So that was savage. And it's always intentional how you serve someone when you do it in a very public and big way. So the composer was obviously very angry. And what's important to note is from a legal perspective, comedy does usually benefit from the protection of First Amendment rights where you when something's comedy or satire that you can't get sued for it. However, an interesting angle that the composer took was that he said it wasn't comedy because this wasn't done mid bit. He was on a podcast, and because podcasts are conversational and interview style, he was just answering a question and not making a joke. So he's really stretching and doing some legal gymnastics here, in my opinion. The thing, though, that is most important to know about defamation is that it requires a false statement of fact. It has to be false. So everything is going to turn on whether this was false or not. But if there's some truth to the definition of how he phrased the song, look, there is a lion, oh my God, if there's some truth to that, that is a good defense to the defamation claim. Also, Jonasi can prove that this was just a joke. Like whether or not he was up on stage doing stand up or in the middle of a podcast. I mean, when you're a comedian, everything's a bit. You could be out to lunch and just talking to your mom on the phone. You're doing a bit. So, of course, if he's on a podcast and he's a comedian, he's trying to be funny. I think that's a stretch to say because he's in the middle of a conversation, it's no longer a joke and then he doesn't get First Amendment protection. I think that it sounds scandalous that he's being sued for $27 million. But folks, I don't think this lawsuit has any legs to stand on. Now, I think the fact that people found this clip of him explaining what the chant was so funny just shows that it was a joke. And furthermore, the words in the chant literally refer to a lion, so the translation is not completely fabricated. These are all good defenses, and I don't think that this defamation claim is going to hold up at all. Something I love about this story, though, is that now the comedian is selling merch that says, "Look, it's a lawsuit. Oh my God." I just love that. Lean into it. Make some money off of that. He's also raising money on a GoFundMe for his defense, which means that the same joke that got him sued is now paying for the lawsuit. So, is that, my friends, the actual circle of life? Sit with that for a few. Okay, now I gotta circle back to Taylor Frankie Paul because this week another bombshell was dropped. She will still be getting paid, as news reports are reporting, for working, filming The Bachelorette, even though the season is not airing. Now, this is an example of contracts contracting because it's almost as if when you sign a contract, there are terms and you kind of get bound by them. Contracts don't care how people feel about a situation, they care about what happened. So, if per the terms she had to do XYZ, which included filming the season, doing promotion, showing up, and she did those things, i.e., she filmed the season, check, we know that, did promotion, we've seen the ads, she showed up, she performed, she's entitled to get paid for what she did. So, unless ABC can clearly rely on their morality clause, which isn't so simple, especially if they already knew about the underlying conduct, which we've been saying that they do, payment is still very much on the table. And this is just one of those moments where the internet and the law are just not aligned. Sorry, folks. The internet reacts emotionally, and contracts They just keep operating based on the terms. Now, I want to end with this story because it's the one I've been waiting for. A jury just found that the social media platforms, YouTube and Instagram, can be held liable legally responsible can be held legally responsible for addiction. This one is huge because it's not about content, it's about design. The social media platforms were being sued because their platforms allegedly were designed to make kids addicted. And they, in fact, did result in addicted children, addicted teens. The design encouraged infinite scroll, algorithm feeds, just inability to move off the app because it kept going and going, autoplay, notifications. It was basically a slot machine and casino in your pocket. It's just packed with features that are incredibly effective at keeping people engaged. And now those features are being looked at as a potential source of harm. And in fact, the jury just found that they are harmful. Now the argument is not that people choose to use it's this was designed to keep people using it. And that's a completely different legal theory. But the problem is that's awkward is that even with this decision and even with decisions that go forward, we all still have the apps, still use it. Many of us are kind of addicted to it. So it's a weird relationship. Like even I, as reporting on it, am still going to continue to use the app. But it makes you really question like, where do our roles lie and where do the creators of the apps roles and responsibilities lie when they knowingly create something that has addictive properties. It's reminding me of big tobacco. And we know that those landmark cases really changed the landscape for tobacco. Mind you, TikTok settled the case right before trial, as did Snapchat. The insurance companies were denying coverage for this because it was an intentional design of addiction versus a negligent framework. Claims are being framed as intentional design decisions instead of accidents. If something is considered intentional, insurance doesn't apply, which means that there's direct exposure to these platforms. And if you face direct exposure, you're probably going to make some changes because ultimately it's going to cost these platforms a lot of money. I find it strange also that they just hit this major verdict where they were found liable for the social media addiction, and then they also said they're ending end-to-end encryption on messaging. Is there some sort of connection? Let me know your thoughts. And before we close, I want to try something new. It's called Exhibit A or Exhibit B. I'll give you a situation and you decide who's actually responsible. So, a network casts someone because they're controversial, promotes them, builds a show around them, and then cancels everything when the audience reacts to behavior that they already knew about. Who's actually responsible? Exhibit A, the talent, or Exhibit B, the network? Who actually owns that outcome? I'm curious what your opinion is. That's it for this week. This was one of those weeks where pop culture and the law are not separate conversations. If you enjoyed this, please share it with a friend, anyone who needs a legal bestie in their life. Follow the podcast, rate it 5 stars, review it, leave a comment. Follow me on Instagram, JasmineWeggySQ, or on TikTok, Jazz the Lawyer. I'll see you next time, guys. Stay curious.